Welcome. What do chocolate, consciousness, and the mysteries of time have in common? They're all intriguing components of the personality and passions of today's guest, senior lecturer in psychology, consciousness researcher, and best-selling author of over a dozen books on psychology and spirituality, Steve Taylor, PhD. A leading voice in bridging psychology and consciousness, Steve has spent a lifetime exploring the mysteries of the mind, time, and the soul, and also how perception shapes reality. Today, he's going to share how, like time itself, books can also stretch, bend, open new worlds, and spark profound transformations within us. Steve Taylor, welcome.
Hi, Sandy. What a lovely introduction. That was great.
I'm trying to meld together all of your passions, and I had to
Yeah.
put it in there.
Yeah, you did it very well. Yeah, including chocolate.
Yeah. So you said that you've always been a bookworm, and books have been wonderful companions on your journey, sustaining you. Um, you also said that you've heard spiritual teachers say it isn't necessary to read books; they can be a distraction. What's your answer to that?
I actually did have a spiritual teacher who said, you don't need to. He told me I was reading too many books. And he said you didn't really need to read more than a dozen books. And that should be enough to keep you going. But my answer to that is books are a window into other people's consciousness. It's fascinating to explore other people's minds and beings, especially poetry. I love poetry, and every poem is like a window into a person's experience. A lot of poems just capture a moment of experience, and it's wonderful to be able to visit them in that moment of experience and to experience it yourself through their eyes. So I think books also that they're about orientation. For me, when I was younger, I didn't understand myself at all. I was very confused when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. And it was really books which saved me because they helped me to understand myself and they helped me to accept myself and they gave me a map to understand the world and myself.
If we only read 12 books, that would imply that we don't think we have anything more to learn. And what about
Yeah,
new stuff coming out?
I know. I think maybe he was referring to spiritual books. Maybe you need 12 spiritual books.
And maybe
But,
they've all been written already.
yeah.
I would say that there is a lot of duplication going on,
There
and
is. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say that spiritual books, they're kind of like different people's perspectives on the same landscape of experience, of the same expansive landscape of human experience. So yeah, there's bound to be a lot of overlap. Um,
the bit about poetry that you mentioned, and there are some poetry books in your list, is that for me, um, people are moved to create poetry when they're moved. And so
mm,
what we're actually getting is a really elevated experience of and perception of whatever it is they're writing about.
yeah.
It's ramped up so that the highest quality description, if you like, of their experiences comes forth.
Exactly. It's a transmission. They're having an elevated experience. They're framing it or capturing it in a few verses, and they're passing it on to us. So it's kind of like you were talking about time. It's a way of transcending time. You can read a poem that was written 300 years ago, and it transmits to you now. It connects you with that experience. Same with paintings, I guess. I had a weird experience a few years ago at the National Gallery in London. I felt like, all of the old paintings from 200 or 300 years ago, they were windows into the artist's experience. And the artist's experiences were present now through those windows. So yeah, I guess it's a way of transmitting experience and keeping it alive.
Mm. Talking about paintings, I went to in London. They have these. I don't know what they call them, immersions, and they pick an artist and they do
Oh,
all kinds of things with their work, and they're screening it, moving around. You're sitting in the dark on a deck chair in this big empty room, and all around you on all four walls, the art is moving, and
Uh,
gives you a whole other perspective on, somebody's paintings. It's just incredible. I could have sat there all day.
oh, I've seen those. I mean, I've heard about those, but I've not been to one of them. I heard there was a Van Gogh one, which would have been
Yes,
really great.
that's the one that I went to.
Oh yeah,
Beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful.
I should go to. He's one of my favorite artists
Yeah,
because
mine.
he was somebody who lived in a heightened state of awareness. Obviously, quite a troubled person too. A lot of people who live in a heightened state of awareness are troubled, but he
Yeah,
was able to convey his spiritual experiences through his paintings.
yeah. You also said that it wasn't easy to distill your list down to 10. In fact, you sneaked in an 11.
Did I?
You did. You
Really?
did.
Oh, I must have lost count. I didn't know that.
So how did you do that? What criteria did you use?
I chose the books which had the biggest influence on me at the time, and the books were pivotal in helping me to understand myself, and also the books which were the most inspiring and moving. And it's true. Each of the books I chose, in a way, they were all pivotal. They all represented pivotal moments in my life, in my spiritual journey.
Good. Good. That's exactly what we want. Yeah.
Mm,
Well, the first book on your list is one that was banned as obscene in America for
mm.
27 years after its first publication in Paris in 1934, because it was highly controversial and spiritually explicit. But it wasn't the sex in the book that really got to you. So the book is The Tropic of Cancer by Henry
Yeah.
Miller, 1934. It was published. What was it about this book that impacted you?
I remember vividly when I first read this book. I was staying at a friend's house. I was 19 years old, and my friend had gone to bed, and I was sleeping in his living room. And I was just sort of looking through his bookcase, and I just picked out this book, Tropic of Cancer, Henry Miller. I had no idea who Henry Miller was, but right from the first paragraph, it had such a powerful impact on me. I'd never read a book which was so fresh and immediate, and which it's incredibly direct the way it's written. It feels as if you're eavesdropping or entering somebody's mind. It's so immediate.
Yes.
And Henry Miller, he was such a good writer. He's such an amazingly fluent and vivid writer that even now, 100 years later, almost 100 years later, his prose seems modern. It seems alive. It's incredibly vivid. But what really got to me about the book was it has a spiritual element, which I wouldn't have used that term at the time. And maybe he wouldn't have used the term. I'm not sure if he knew anything about spirituality. But the whole book is a kind of spiritual journey. It's about, I mean, he says right at the beginning of the book, he says, I have no money, no resources, no hopes. I am the happiest man alive. And that's really the theme of the book, that he has nothing. He's living on the verge of starvation in Paris. It's autobiographical, by the way. It's
Mm.
completely autobiographical. So he's gone to Paris to try to become a novelist. He was actually a successful professional person in New York, but he gave up his job and decided that he had to try and make it as an author, and goes to Paris, which was known as it still is, as the city of art, the
Mm.
city of artists. But everything goes wrong. His wife is supposed to be arriving with some money, but his wife doesn't turn up. So he's waiting for his wife to come for months, living on the verge of starvation, trying to, begging meals from friends, sleeping on friends' floors, sometimes sleeping on the streets, and, always in a state of hunger. And, his attempts to be an artist aren't initially successful. But in sort of stripping himself down and giving up his job, giving up everything to be an author or an artist, he finds a deep well-being. He realizes that he's living authentically, and he realizes that through living authentically, there's a freedom. In spite of the material deprivation and the suffering, he finds a freedom, And there are so many great passages in the book where he describes how beautiful Paris is and how beautiful it is to be alive. It's a very poetic book.
Because he was there at a very interesting time.
Oh
A lot
yeah,
of people were there then.
that's right. Yeah. And it's not the kind of book that you read sequentially from the first page to the last. It doesn't have much of a plot, but you can just open it at any page and you find beautiful descriptions and these spiritual passages describing how liberated he feels, how and how great it is to be alive, just to be alive, even though you don't have any attachments or any achievements or anything really. But I mean, I guess that's part of the freedom that he's let he's let go of all of those things.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, when you do let go of so many things, you do feel more alive. You take more joy in life.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the paradoxes of of loss. Of when your hopes are revealed to be illusions, or when you even sometimes when people when relationships break up or people lose their jobs, they find a new kind of authenticity, even a new joy in letting go of these things.
Yeah.
They realize that happiness is not something external. It doesn't come from external things. The more you depend on happiness, the more you depend on external things for happiness, the less access you have to an inner happiness, which is always there and doesn't depend on anything external.
Yeah. Yeah. Your second book, really interesting book. I love this book. It is The Outsider by Colin Wilson, which was published in 1956. You said that you very much felt like an outsider when you were young.
That's true. I didn't understand myself at all when I was a teenager. I had quite a happy childhood. But when I got to the age of 15 or 16, something changed inside me. I became incredibly self-conscious. I found it really difficult to speak to people. And I had no social skills. I felt different to the people around me. And people actually used to say that I was weird because I would sit there and wouldn't say anything. I just couldn't say anything. I couldn't speak. I was just so incredibly self-conscious. And even when I was walking down the street in my hometown, I feel uneasy due to the fact that people could have been looking at me, even if they weren't. I was aware that there could have been people in the windows looking at me. So it was a very strange time. And I didn't enjoy the things that people around me seemed to enjoy, like drinking and socializing, trying to have fun. It just wasn't really me. So I knew I was different, but I felt bad about it. I didn't accept myself. My parents, they wanted me to be normal. They thought I was strange. My father used to say to me, "Here's £5. Go to the pub and try and chat up a girl. So buy yourself a beer and chat up a girl." Something like that. So The Outsider was quite an important book for me because it explained that it was okay to be different. It was actually a good thing to be an outsider. It wasn't a good thing to be normal. I always wanted to be normal, but I couldn't be normal, so I felt bad about it. I felt, I had a lot of self-hatred because I wanted to be like other people, but I couldn't be. Especially when I was at university and everyone seemed to be having a great time, but I wasn't. I was I found it difficult to join in all the fun. So, but when I read The Outsider, it was like a revelation. It was like, wow, maybe there's something good about being different. Maybe it's not a good thing to be normal. Maybe I'm actually in some way, following a better path than all of these people who seem to be happy. Maybe they're just deluding themselves and they're not really happy. They're just pretending. So it was a revelation, and it changed my image of myself. And and the book is so fascinating in itself. He introduced me to a whole new world of literature. I started to read people like Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, people who Sartre, Camus, people who were completely unfamiliar to me before, but who he talks about in the book.
Mm.
But later in the book, he also addresses topics like mysticism and spirituality. I think he says somewhere in the book that the outsider begins as a social misfit, but he ends as a mystic or a saint. And I think that's true. The outsider is really somebody who is following a path of self-development.
Yeah.
And if you follow that path, to its latter stages, you do become a spiritually awakened person, like a mystic or a saint.
I think that's inevitable. Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Book number 3 is the Upanishads, and your particular version of it that you like the most is translation by one Maskara.
that's right. The Upanishads. I read a book which was an anthology of quotes from mystical texts, and it had a number of passages from the Upanishads, and they immediately attracted my attention partly because a lot of spiritual texts are quite difficult to understand. They're full of concepts. They're kind of overladen with religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sometimes difficult to elicit or to glean the meaning of them. But the Upanishads are somehow so pure and direct. There's not much conceptual material in them. There aren't really any beliefs there's not really any religion in the Upanishads. But what you do have it are some beautiful poetic descriptions of a spiritual reality, of a realm of spiritual experience. To me, the Upanishads, they're just radiant. They just shine like a thousand suns. They shine with the light of pure spirituality without this layer of concepts. It's just the pure essence of spirituality shining through. So they're just incredibly beautiful. I find it amazing that some of the Upanishads are over 2,000 years old, maybe even 2,500 years old, but they're just so timeless. They could have been written by a spiritually awakened person yesterday, or in a thousand years in the future. They're completely timeless because they're so pure and direct.
Which is truth, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because it's for all ages, all times. It's universal.
that's right. Yeah, and it's true that there are some great Christian mystics like Saint John of the Cross, Saint Teresa. There are some great Chinese spiritual texts like the Tao Te Ching. And the Jewish mysticism of the Kabbalah is very profound and very interesting. But a lot of those texts are overladen with, they're difficult to understand without some kind of commentary because there's so much conceptual material. The Christian mystics are often, Christian beliefs kind of impinge on the texts. So they still have a pure spiritual essence, but it's kind of overladen with concepts. But the Upanishads don't have that. It is just the timeless essence of pure spirit.
At what point in your development did you read the Upanishads?
I was quite young, maybe 20, 22, 23 years old. But they just attracted me in a very powerful way. I actually used to carry the volume that we're talking about is quite slim, maybe about 100 pages. I used to carry it around with me in my pocket and just read it on the bus, or even when I was walking, I'd read it. Uh, yeah, I don't know why it's so beautiful to me, but there's definitely something about it which appeals very, very powerfully to me. Maybe in my previous life, I was an Indian, a Hindu spiritual seeker or something like that.
Hmm. Book number 4. Not entirely sure of the pronunciation. Demian?
Damien.
Hessian. They call it Damien.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Spelt with an E. By Hermann Hesse, which was published in 1919. I haven't heard of this one before. Of course, we usually get Siddhartha recommended the most.
Yeah, well, Siddhartha is a beautiful book, and he wrote a lot of beautiful novels. But Damien is my favorite because it seems to suggest that, well, it's very important that it was written shortly after the First World War, and there was a real feeling of doom at that point, maybe similar to now. There was a sense that the world was possibly coming to an end, that civilization was possibly coming to an end. But in Damien, there's a sense that there's a new group of people coming together to create a new world. And they come together, they recognize each other, that they have a kind of visible sign of allegiance that they can recognize, and they slowly come together to create a new world. They realize that the old world is inevitably decaying and disappearing, and this new world of harmony is coming into existence. And I think that that's so important to me, because I think it's actually true. I do believe that the old human consciousness, which still dominates us in the present day,
Mm.
is, you know, cannot survive indefinitely. It's pathological, and it's creating chaos and destruction in the world right now. But there is a counter movement to that. There are people who are there is a new kind of consciousness emerging,
Yes.
and and we're part of that. I think there are millions of people around the world who are bringing this new kind of consciousness into being, and that this new consciousness is slowly supplanting the old pathological consciousness. So I think we're all like the characters in that novel. We're all characters who are coming together to create a new world of harmony as the old world is decaying.
Mm. Number 5, The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy, published in 1886.
This is a beautiful short novel, and it was written in the latter years of Tolstoy's life, and he was, as you may know, he was a Russian aristocrat who'd been enjoying the aristocrat's lifestyle of wealth and privilege and pleasure. But towards the end of his life, he had a kind of a revelation or a transformation. He couldn't live that way anymore, and he stopped living a life of privilege and dressed as a peasant, tried to live a peasant's lifestyle. And so basically, he had a kind of spiritual awakening, you could say. And I think this novel is a product of that spiritual awakening. Um, and it's somewhere I've heard people describe it as one of the most depressing novels ever written, but I think those people haven't really read it to the end. They don't really understand it, because it is depressing, because it describes how the main character, Ivan, he's a civil servant, kind of moderately successful middle class professional person, but slowly he becomes ill. We never find out what's wrong with him, but it's obviously probably cancer. So he slowly gets more and more sick, and he slowly becomes unable to do his job. He can't socialize with his friends anymore. He's too ill to socialize. And he realizes that all his friends are not genuine friends. They only like him because of his status or his profession, of who he appears to be. And even his wife, even his family don't really know him. They realize that they only like his superficial self, which is fading away as he gets ill. So he becomes disenchanted. He realizes that he's been living by illusions, that nothing is authentic. None of his relationships are authentic. All of the things that used to bring him pleasure, seem dull and mundane. So he becomes really depressed. But as he moves towards his final hours, and I shouldn't really tell you this in case anybody wants to read it to the end, but all I'll say is that he has a kind of revelation or a transformation right in his final hours. And again, it's a bit like Tropic of Cancer in a way. It's like stripping away all of these superficial layers of our identity. In fact, now I think about it, it's exactly the same thing. Stripping away all these superficial layers to find this kind of essence, this radiant essence inside us, this radiant natural joy, which is the essence of our being. And that's what he finds in his final hours as he's dying. So he basically dies in a state of joy.
I would think that most people, as they're dying, if they know they're dying and they've got time, the dying's more slowly, come to that conclusion. I mean,
Yeah,
what you said about even his wife and family didn't really know him. I think that is so true.
yeah,
We see us each other cloaked in whatever role we're playing, whether it's business, or whatever, when we don't see the person within.
I think so, yeah. I think that's quite common. It's quite sad, but it is quite common. A lot of people do live on this superficial level.
Mm,
And that's why, experiences like illness, poverty, they can actually be helpful because they do strip away the layers and bring
yes.
us to a more essential self.
Yeah, many people say an illness was the best thing that ever happened to them.
Yeah, I mean, in my research, I've met a lot of people who were diagnosed with cancer, for example, and they say it was transformational. It kind of it saved them in a way by bringing them to reality and making them aware of the preciousness of life and the beauty of life and the meaning of life.
Yeah, yeah. Book number 6 is the selected poems by D.H. Lawrence. So lots
Ah.
of people have gathered together their favourite poems, so there is no specific author here.
Well, D.H. Lawrence is my favourite author of all. I feel such a powerful attraction to him. I think he was a complete genius, and partly because as a person he triumphed over so many difficulties. He had a short life. He died at the age of 44. He was born into poverty. He was born into illness as well. He was never healthy in his whole life. He always had health problems, and he never was taken seriously as an author. He was kind of ridiculed. The critics didn't like him, so he overcame a lot of difficulties. But he was incredibly prolific. He wrote over 40 books in his short lifespan, nearly 1,000 poems. So he was a genius. He was this kind of constant creative flow, and people would say that people would watch him write, and he'd write for sort of 10 hours without a break, and people would say that it just came through me. He never stopped. He was completely unconscious, as if he was channeling. And his best poems. This book is a collection of maybe 150 of his poems. And they're so beautiful that they shine with, a bit like the Upanishads, they shine with spiritual radiance. I mean, he's not normally thought of as a spiritual person, but in my view, he was definitely a spiritually awakened person. He definitely lived in a higher state of consciousness. You can see that from his novels. I mean, his novels are most famous, like The Rainbow, Women in Love, Lady Chatterley's Lover. But they're so, the landscape is so alive in his novels. Everything is so alive. Animals are alive. He seems to see into the essence of human beings and to animals and to plants, almost as if he has this kind of X-ray vision that allows him to see into the life of things. But he also wrote some beautiful poems. Probably his most beautiful poems he wrote when he was dying. He was dying of tuberculosis, and a bit like what we were just talking about, actually, he found a deep peace in the process of dying. So it's all these really beautiful, serene poems about the process of dying, really, really moving and profound and inspiring.
He wrote that in his poem Gladness of Death, he describes death as a great adventure which is full of and after gladness, a strange
Mm.
joy. A few of the books that you've mentioned, you talk about death in them. Is that something that, you know, you get have a lot of interest in, or you find moments of incredible grace in reading about death?
Yeah, I've always, from a young age, I was always very conscious of death. I can actually remember when I was about 16, and it occurred to me, it was like a revelation. Oh, I'm going to die at some point. And it was a revelation. I also realized that if I wanted to, I could die now. I could choose to take my own life if I wanted to. It was a revelation. And ever since then, I've always been very aware that life is temporary and fragile and therefore precious. I've always been aware that death could come at any moment. It could come tomorrow or even tonight. And but I've always thought that it's very healthy to be aware of death because it is a reality after all. Everything I've said about it is completely true. And if you don't think about it, you're kind of avoiding it. You're not facing up to the reality. I think there is a lot of freedom that comes from being aware of death. It is transformational. I mean, this is the kind of transformation that people who are diagnosed with cancer have. All it really means is they're becoming aware of the reality of death. So it's always been, it's always been
So you
a
don't
reality
fear
to
it.
me. Sorry?
You don't fear it.
I don't fear it. I used to have this fear that I might die before I'd said what I wanted to say, before I'd expressed what was inside me. But now I feel I've expressed a lot of what's inside me. I've still got more to express. But yeah, when I was younger, I thought, no, I can't die. I've got so much there's so much inside me that needs to come out.
I know that feeling when I was younger. It was, I cannot die until I know it all. I have to
Yeah.
know it all. I cannot conceive of leaving without knowing it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. And now, I used to, I used to be skeptical about the idea of life after death, but now I'm pretty sure that there is some form of an afterlife. So I don't think of it as the end. I think of it as, like D.H. Lawrence said, a new journey.
A new journey. Absolutely.
Mm, yeah.
So, book number 7 is Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, published in 1855. And this is a book that you regard as even more powerful than the Upanishads and Tao Te Ching.
Yeah. Walt Whitman was an amazing guy. He was, in my view, one of the most spiritually awakened people who has ever lived on this planet. Equal to Buddha, Jesus, and other famous figures. And his poetry is basically a vehicle for him to describe his spiritually awakened awareness. He just sees a spiritual radiance in everything. Even the most kind of mundane, even the most, the kind of the dirty, you know, base and even the kind of disgusting things in the world. He finds a beauty in them. He even describes people who are seriously injured. He was a nurse in the Civil War, so obviously he encountered a lot of dying people. He even describes injuries and people who are maimed. He sees beauty in that. Um, there's a really beautiful. He wrote a lot of beautiful poems about his experiences in the Civil War, and he writes about an enemy soldier who he treats as he's dying. And once he's passed away, he kisses him and says, "You were never my enemy. You are not my enemy now. You never were." And even though surrounded by death and destruction, he senses there's something beyond it. There's something that transcends it. There's another beautiful poem where he's treating a soldier who is just about to die, and there are lots of relatives around who are weeping naturally, and they are crying as he passes away. But Walt Whitman he kneels down, bows down and whispers in his ear, "I do not commiserate with you, I congratulate you," because he's entering, the afterworld. So it's so beautiful. And there's another beautiful poem of his called Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. He lived in Brooklyn most of his life. And he describes crossing the ferry, all of the people around him, all of the buildings around him. And he talks to the reader. He says, "You, the reader of this poem, decades from now, centuries from now, I greet you. I open my heart to you." Things like that. So, he sort of, the poetry is kind of timeless. And yeah, it's so beautiful. And there's no evidence that Walt Whitman was spiritual in a traditional sense. He didn't know anything about traditional spirituality. Wasn't particularly religious. Some people say that he read the Bhagavad Gita later in his life, maybe the Upanishads, but not early on when he wrote his most beautiful poetry. So it's completely spontaneous and natural kind of spirituality that he expresses.
And he actually wrote 9 editions, 9 separate editions of this book, including a deathbed edition.
Yeah, he kept basically it was his life's work. So whenever he wrote new poems, he'd include them. He'd expand the edition and keep adding to the poems he already had. And his collected works is so enormous. He wrote thousands of poems. Like a lot of spiritually awakened people, he was very prolific in his creativity.
I liked what you wrote. You said the Upanishads tells us that all is spirit, that we are one with the universe, and that the soul is deathless, but Whitman shows it.
Yeah. And he shows us, how spirit manifests itself in everyday life. His poetry is full of descriptions of ordinary people, everyday events, but they all shine with this spiritual radiance.
Book number 8, Irreducible Mind, Towards the Psychology for the 21st Century. Wow, it's got so many authors: Edward Kelly, Emily Williams, Bruce Grayson, Adam Crabtree, published in 2009.
This is it's quite different to all of my other books. This is a very academic book, quite a difficult read, even for me. I'm very I'm well used to reading these kind of books, but this is, I guess it's a difficult read because it's so profound and it's so detailed. It covers so many different perspectives. It's also very long. I think it's about 700 pages, but it's a very important book. A kind of pivotal book, really, because it describes the various ways in which the materialistic mindset cannot explain reality. It explains how materialism can't explain consciousness. It can't explain how the mind affects the body. It can't explain creativity. It can't explain near-death experiences or psychic phenomena like telepathy. So in a very kind of methodical and detailed way, it shows that the materialist worldview, which is still dominant in our culture, it doesn't work. It's a completely false way of understanding reality. So it suggests that there's got to be something more. There's got to be another way of explaining reality beyond materialism. So they suggest that the only way to explain reality is to say that consciousness is not just something that comes from brain cells. Consciousness is something fundamental in the universe. It's something that is everywhere around us, and maybe even the physical stuff of our bodies or the world around us. Maybe that comes from consciousness. Maybe consciousness is the source of all things. So it's a very important kind of, I guess you call it a philosophical or a work of psychology. It's a very important academic book.
So you wrote that a few years ago you were writing a book called Spiritual Science, and when people asked what it was about, you said, I'm trying to write a popular version of Irreducible Mind. Do you think that you managed that?
I do. Yeah, I mean, Irreducible Mind is such an important book, but I thought it was a shame that it was such a weighty academic tome, a weighty in both senses of the term. So I probably wanted to write a popular version of it. But I also wanted to put forward my own view of the world, my own philosophy, which I call panspiritism. It's the same kind of idea, the idea that spirit is the basic thing in the universe. Everything comes from spirit. Spirit is everywhere around us, which is the same thing that the Upanishads said. The Upanishads call spirit Brahman. And I added some other things in as well. I talked about altruism, how you can't explain human altruism in materialistic terms. The only way you can explain altruism is through a kind of spiritual connection between human beings. So I think I without sounding conceited, I'm normally a self-deprecating English person, but I do think I succeeded and I kind of added some new elements.
Well, I know that Eckhart Tolle sings your praises, so a lot of people do think that you succeeded.
Yeah, hopefully.
So, book number 9, Meister Eckhart, From Whom God Hid Nothing: Sermons, Writings, and Sayings, published in 1963. I'm not sure who wrote that.
Well, Meister Eckhart was a Christian mystic who lived in the 13th and 14th century in Germany. And a lot of his published writings were actually sermons that he gave in his local church in the 13th or 14th century. And he's a little bit like, I guess, there's a similarity with the Upanishads because, you know, he was giving these sermons, what is it, 800 years ago or something like that? But they sound so timeless and relevant. They just shine with that same pure essence of spirituality which the Upanishads have.
Mm.
And people have actually puzzled over the fact that Meister Eckhart's teachings were so similar to some of the Hindu sages of earlier centuries. And obviously, Meister Eckhart wasn't familiar with those Hindu sages. Obviously, he hadn't read the Upanishads or other Hindu spiritual texts. But it's the same. The similarities are so strong. And some people are puzzled over the fact, did he, maybe he did read these writings, or maybe, Meister Eckhart was familiar with some Greek philosophers. Maybe those Greek philosophers were familiar with Indian teachings. So it's possible. But really, you don't need those kind of explanations. Meister Eckhart and the authors of the Upanishads they were just perceiving the same spiritual realities in a slightly in a different time, in a different culture. But it's the same spiritual realities that they're describing. So it's not surprising that, that they share common ground. What I love about Meister Eckhart is that he was a Christian, but he was a very unorthodox kind of Christian. For example, he said that God is not the ultimate reality. God comes from what he called it the Godhead. So the Godhead is the essence of the universe. God emerges from the Godhead. So obviously the Pope didn't like that. He thought Meister Eckhart was being blasphemous.
Yeah.
And then Meister Eckhart said some other blasphemous things. He said that the eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. And, so he believed that God exists inside human beings as the essence of our soul. And he didn't believe that God is a separate reality. It exists on a separate level of reality, overlooking the world and controlling the world. He thought God was manifest within human beings as our deepest soul. So he was he was obviously a deeply spiritually awakened person.
It's amazing, isn't it? How, throughout history, we see this time and time again, these people. I mean, he was in an obscure part of Germany, and his works went out into the world and have stayed out in the world, and
Yeah,
throughout history, there are people who, in small, unknown places, make a massive impact, and
it's amazing.
through the ages.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Mm.
But I guess that shows that their work does come from a place of spiritual wisdom. That's why it survives, because it is timeless. They are expressing profound, essential spiritual realities.
Yeah, yeah. And, many people have written about him and his works. And, I don't know who put this particular collection together, but obviously it's a good one.
Yeah, I can't remember who edited it, but yeah, I mean his actual writings are there are thousands of pages because he gave so many sermons. He was probably giving a sermon every week,
Yeah.
and somebody had the good sense to record them.
Yes. So, okay, book number 10. This book is consistently in the top 5 recommended books of all time. I mean, in the last 5 years that we've been doing this. And of course, it is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, published in 1997. What was it about this book that really impacted you?
I guess it was something similar to the Upanishads or to Meister Eckhart. It was a directness. I mean, Eckhart doesn't follow any particular spiritual tradition. He's not a Buddhist. He's not a Hindu. He's not a Taoist. He just expresses the transcendent essence of spirituality, which goes beyond any particular tradition. And I think that gives it a lot of power. That gives his work a lot of power. It's free from any conceptual baggage. It's very pure and direct. I guess ultimately it comes from his own experience. And he's also, people don't often talk about this, but he's also a very good writer. he writes in a very concise way. So it's very easy to read and it's very powerful. And, you know, if you go back to the spiritual teacher who told me you don't need to read books, books can't give you the truth. Books are just words. But the power of now, it has a quality that goes beyond words.
Yes, it does.
And I think the best poets can, also have this. There's something about those words which conveys something beyond words. The words are just a vehicle to convey a transcendent quality. And that's why the power of now, it has a kind of uncanny power. It has a kind of transformational quality.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was published. It was basically originally self-published.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
Immediately it began to find readers. And eventually a mainstream publisher picked it up.
Yes.
And obviously it became a bestseller.
Yeah.
I've met so many people over the years. One of my areas of research is people who undergo spiritual awakening, usually in the context of suffering or turmoil and trauma. And I sometimes say to them, well, what helped? Was there anything that helped you to understand yourself? And they say, oh yeah, it was. I found this book called The Power of Now. It really resonated with me and gave me self-understanding. Or sometimes they say it was reading The Power of Now which triggered my transformation. So it's a kind of a nuclear bomb of a book. It's full of explosive power, but at the same time very still and serene.
Okay, well, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your 11th book. I don't normally, but because it's by William James, I will allow it. The Varieties of Religious Experience, published in 1902. I mean, yes, everything we've heard from you, of course, he should be on your list.
Yeah. He's one of my heroes, William James. He's such a wonderful man. And he was, in mainstream psychology, he's a very revered figure. He basically founded psychology as we know it, especially in America. American psychology is basically the creation of William James. He wrote the first textbook on psychology. He founded the first courses on psychology at Harvard towards the end of the 19th century. But he wasn't just a mainstream psychologist. He was deeply interested in parapsychology. He spent a lot of time investigating mediums, and he was very open-minded about the idea of life after death. And he experimented with altered states of consciousness. He experimented with nitrous oxide and other substances to experience altered states of consciousness. But his most interesting writings are about mystical experience. So this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. It's not really about religious experience. It's about spiritual experience. I think it's slightly mistitled. But yeah, he's somebody. He actually said that apart from his experiences on nitrous oxide and other substances, he hadn't had any mystical experiences. But he has such a clear understanding of mystical experiences that I'm not sure that's true. I think he must have had some mystical experiences of his own. So he's one of my heroes. That's why I've chosen the book.
Okay, well, that's your 11 books.
Sorry, I didn't realise I'd written 11.
That's okay. Let's talk about you and a little bit about your books, especially your most recent one. I mean, you're a senior lecturer in psychology at Leeds Beckett University. You've published many, many books that have been translated into more than 20 languages, including The Adventure, The Leap, and Spiritual Science. You're past chair of the Transpersonal Psychology section of the British Psychological Society, and you write the popular Out of the Darkness blog for Psychology Today. Your spiritual journey, I mean, was there one pivotal moment of enlightenment, or was it a gradual opening?
It was gradual. It seemed to be inside me from the beginning. And it began to unfold when I was a teenager. But as we said at the beginning, I didn't understand myself back then. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was crazy. I probably was crazy back then. But so it was partly a process of understanding my natural spirituality, and it was kind of revelatory when I read books about spirituality. I thought, wow, this is me. This is what I'm interested in. These people are like me. I've had similar experiences. So I had a framework to understand myself. So as soon as I read about spirituality in my early 20s, I realized that was where I wanted to be. I realized that this is my home. This is the landscape where I feel at home. So I guess in my early years I was quite unstable though. I suffered from depression. Even though I felt I was on a spiritual journey, I felt a bit uneasy and unstable in myself. So really, it was a question of kind of stabilizing myself and integrating into the world. I found it difficult to function in normal society, to sort of hold down a job and to earn a living. But by the time I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I became more stable. I felt that my natural spirituality had sort of become integrated into my life, and I was able to function in the world.
And your work, because I mean, everything now is about bridging, you know, uh, spirituality, science, consciousness, etc.
Yeah, well, that's one of my roles. I think one of my roles is to bring spirituality into mainstream society, into mainstream academia, and into science. There's still a bit of a taboo about spirituality, but I feel that I have a lot of in the UK. I'm in the media quite a lot, but I really like it when I'm in on the kind of mainstream media, on like the BBC, because I feel as I'm bringing spirituality into the BBC.
Yes.
Well, into
Into
people's minds,
yeah, yeah,
who may not otherwise be exposed to it.
yeah,
And a lot of intellectuals are quite skeptical. So I feel as I want to break down the skepticism of intellectuals.
yeah. Well, we need people like you. We do. And your latest book, I love your book. Time Expansion Experiences, the psychology of time perception and the illusion of linear time, in which you unravel all the fascinating mysteries of time, its elasticity, its illusions, all the questions. One of my questions, and you and I did a whole interview about this. Um, one of my questions has always been, you know, why is it that time flies when you're having fun? And
Mm.
really drags when you're not. And, you address that in this book. What made you decide you wanted to write this book?
I had a couple of interesting experiences which really made me ponder the nature of time. One was, I'll describe them very briefly. One was when I was 24 years old. I went to live in Germany. I was in a band and we did a tour of Germany. I fell in love with a German girl and decided to go and live there. And it was Eastern Germany, not long after the fall of the communist regime. So everything was completely different. It was a very exciting time. And when I came back to England for a holiday about 8 months later, everything, I felt as though I'd been away for so long. It felt like eight years rather than 8 months. I was actually surprised that people were still doing the same jobs. How can you still be doing the same job after so long? And it was actually only 8 months. So it made me realize that time is totally subjective. It can stretch. It's totally dependent on the person, the person's state of consciousness. Then I had a sort of mystical experience when I was walking on the coast in Scotland, and time dissolved away, and I felt as though I could have been 1,000 years in the past or 1,000 years in the future. And that also made me realize that maybe there's more to time than just the present moment. Maybe time is like a landscape. Maybe in some way the future and the past are actually here now as a part of the present.
Mm, yeah. I mean, there's many different experiences of time stopping, time, speeding up, slowing down completely. And you talk about how people who have trauma and accidents often time seems to slow right down, and lots of things can happen. And there's many great stories in your book about, one guy whose parachute, was it the parachute didn't open properly? And time, when he realized time slowed down, gave him enough time
Mm.
to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are many stories of people who were in emergency situations and they felt that time slowed down enough for them to take preventative action. Like a woman, there's a woman who she was heavily pregnant, maybe 7 months pregnant, and two burglars were trying to break into a home and shot at her. And she realized that she had to fall to the ground to avoid the shots, but she realized that she had to fall in such a way that she didn't damage her baby. And so she describes all these thoughts that went through her mind in the 1 or 2 seconds that the burglars were shooting at her. It's remarkable. And she was convinced that the slowing down of time helped to save her life and to save a baby's life.
So, what do you think is happening there?
It's an altered state of consciousness in accident situations, and it can also happen in psychedelics. It can happen in deep meditation. It can sometimes happen in sport. People sometimes shift into an altered state of consciousness, and our normal perception of time is just created by our normal state of consciousness. So as soon as you shift into a different state of consciousness, time shifts as well. And I suggest that our normal perception of time is created by our normal ego boundary, our normal feeling of being inside our heads, looking at a world which is out there. So when you switch into an altered state of consciousness, you often lose that sense of separateness. You feel that you're part of your surroundings. And in the process, you also transcend your normal time experience. Time usually slows down radically so that a few seconds can seem like minutes or even longer.
What do you think about time jumping? Cynthia Sue Larson has a book called Time Jumps, and she shares many, many stories that have been sent to her of people having been somewhere else in another time. What do you think is happening there?
I think that's feasible. I think the phenomenon of time slips in parapsychology, there's some research into a phenomenon called retrocognition. We all know about precognition, which is when we perceive future events, but retrocognition is when we glimpse past events. And I think it's possible because time is like space. It's actually spread out all around us. I think that the past does still exist. And it is possible for us to return to the past and to re-experience the past. And in the same way that it's possible for us to glimpse the future and experience the future. Um, I think those experiences are very important.
Do you think it's possible, like the book and the TV series, is it Outlander, where somebody literally goes to live and remains in another time in history for prolonged periods? Do you think that's possible? I've always wanted to do it.
Where would you want to go?
Oh, I don't know, but I want to go and be a fly on the wall. I'm not sure. I want to observe it. I'm not sure I want to live, in an old castle that, you know, is smelly and dirty. I want
Yeah,
to,
you won't want to return to living conditions in the 14th century.
yeah.
I don't think that's possible because of the biological problems of shifting your body through a different, I think in terms of physics, your body would probably implode. It wouldn't survive the shift into a different reality. But I think mentally you can glimpse it, but
Yes.
I don't think you can physically go there.
So you could, you know, you could maybe be in a kind of another dimension and experience it through your consciousness, but not through your physical body.
No, I don't think so. I think your body wouldn't survive the transition into a different reality.
Because I know that when I like to take snapshots in my head when I'm having a nice experience, and I can go and visit them. anytime I want in my mind the memory. But as they're so real that for those moments, I am there.
Yeah. And who do you visit?
Oh,
Or
it's
what?
just a time,
Oh, okay. A time of your life, or
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. I have something similar. Often when I'm kind of dozing, when I'm in that intermediate zone between sleep and wakefulness, I sometimes return to earlier phases of my life, like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I'm actually there. It's not just a memory. I'm actually there. I can sense everything around me. I can sense my reality at that time. So it sort of makes me think that the past does still exist.
yeah. So, quantum science is teaching us so much. Do you think that this theme of time is one that you will continue to, pursue in your books?
Yeah, yeah. I've just received a grant actually to do some research on time, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm actually going to research time slips. When people feel as though they shift to a different period of their lives, or maybe even a different period of history.
Yeah.
So I'd like that's not been researched so much. There's been a lot of research on precognition, but not so much on you know time slips
You should
into the
go and
past.
teach Cynthia Sue Larson then, because she has all kinds of, letters, stories that people. I'll introduce you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in hypnotic regression too.
Mm,
When people sometimes they feel as though they're describing previous incarnations. Sometimes they occasionally speak different languages.
yes.
The language of a person in the 17th century in Spain or whatever.
Yes.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, well, we're almost out of time. Steve, I want to tell you about, no, I want to ask you a question. Steve Jobs, at his memorial service, he gave a copy of Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi to every single person who attended. What book would you give to the people who attend your memorial service?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I think it would be. I'm trying to decide between the selected poems of D.H. Lawrence or Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Probably Leaves of Grass because it's the most profound spiritual book
Mm,
I know.
nice choice. Mm. Steve Taylor, thank you for adding your 10 best list of spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you, Sandie. It's been a pleasure.
For more information on Steve Taylor's books, essays, articles, poems, and events, visit Stephen with a V, mtaylor.com. Before we close, Steve Taylor's journey reminds us that transformation is often sparked by the quiet moments, a story that resonates, an idea that won't let go, a truth that feels like remembering. In the end, the books that shape us aren't just words on a page, they're doorways to new worlds, new selves, and new ways of being. So keep following the words that light you up and never underestimate the power of a good book or a good bar of chocolate. That's it for this week. If today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other two shows, the Synergy Sessions, where leading edge thinkers come together in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities, and Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysteries of consciousness, energy, the hidden layers of reality, and science converges with spirit in ways that you've never imagined. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, goodbye from me and thank you again to Steve Taylor.
Thank you.